Hello, everybody, and welcome to our AP exam review for the AP US History exam. The format I'm going to do this review is that I am actually making videos reviewing each of the periods. Today we'll be reviewing period 1 and 2, and I'm going to show you these videos, put these in the live session so that you can follow along and watch the video as we go along. And then I'm going to come in afterwards and be available to answer any questions that you might have. I've scheduled these for an hour long. It does not mean that they will be an hour long, but I do want to be available to answer questions that you might have. And that's why I'm doing the video format. That way, if you have any questions while we are going through, you can throw those up in the chat and I will be able to answer them kind of real time versus where I would normally be reviewing like this. I wouldn't really have time or be focusing 100% on the chat. So these videos will be available for you. Not of me answering the questions, but these videos will be available of me going through the information and talking a little bit about the exam with you. So don't feel bad if you do have to miss a day and can't attend all of the sessions because the videos will be available for you to see, and I will be available for you to answer or to answer any questions that you might have. So today we are going to do three things. One, we are going to talk about what the exam is going to look like this year because we are taking it in a digital format, so it is going to look a little bit differently. And then we are going to discuss periods 1 and 2. Now, periods 1 and 2 are pretty short, so this video today is not going to be super lengthy, but my plan is to go through, I have a slide presentation of actually going through the period and kind of just a quick review of that. Then discussing important people that you need to know in these periods. And then we're actually going to go in and look at some of the review questions that you actually did on your quizzes as we went through this unit and discuss those questions and what they look like. And I'll try to give you some tips and tricks with those questions. So again, we are going to be doing 6 of these review sessions. This will get us through each period. And the thing that I always tell my students is that with the AP exam, you can know how to write a DBQ, you can know how to write a LEQ, you can know how to write a short answer question. But if you don't know the content, that none of that stuff is going to help you. So I would really focus on your preparing for this AP exam, focus on the content. I've shared with you some resources to be able to go through. And really what I'm going to be providing now is just a brief or as brief as I can make it overview of all the content so that you will have that to refer back to. So again, really focus on the content because if you have a good grasp on the content, then the rest of all this is easy. The multiple choice is easy and all of that is easy if you have a good understanding of the content. So let's actually look, first of all, what the exam is going to look like this year. So let's look at here the exam sections. So you're going to see section 1, part A. You're still going to have the multiple choice section as you would normally have. Multiple choice, nothing is going to have changed about that. It is still going to be 55 questions, and you will have 55 minutes to answer those questions. Remember, they are in the format of you get a prompt, and then generally there will be 3 to 4 questions with each one of those in that prompt or stimulus. Could either be a quote, it could be a chart, it could be a picture, it could be anything kind of like that in those questions. Now, section 1, part B. This is going to be the different part for us, again, because you are taking it in the digital format. As you can see here, you're going to be given 3 short answer questions, and you have to answer all 3 of those. Question number 1 is about the periods from 1491 to 1980, so that could really cover anything. Question number 2 is 1754 to 1980. And then question number 3 is 1491 to 2001. Now, if you look at those, the focus on each one of them is different. So for question 1, it's going to be some sort of primary source text. So generally, for those, what we have seen in the past is they will give you a couple quotes to discuss and analyze. Question number 2 will generally be some sort of map source. Again, this is a good one to know things such as the slavery, pre-Civil War slavery compromises. That's a big one that they generally like to throw out there, but it really could be anything having to do with a map with this. And then question number 3 will include a primary source image of some sort, usually some sort of political cartoon. If it's more modern stuff, generally you don't see as many political cartoons with that, and they generally show actual pictures and ask you to analyze that. Now, Section 2, both of the exams, again, we're focusing only on the digital one. You will have the DBQ to take. So if you might notice with this, you are not going to have a long essay question in the digital test. Your only 5-paragraph essay that you will be writing is the DBQ. Still, you will have the 1 hour, including the 15-minute reading time. So basically, you have 45 minutes to write this DBQ. Again, with this DBQ, make sure that you have a thesis statement. Make sure that you provide contextualization in your opening paragraph, which basically means you set the backstop you set up what was happening during that time. So, for example, if it's talking about, the 1960s, the late 1960s, you might want to include in there and talk a little bit about the Vietnam Vietnam protests, or you could talk about the Vietnam War going on, or drafts, or whatever like that. So, in that introduction, have contextualization. End it with having, I would recommend a 1-sentence thesis. And remember, from reading your thesis statement, I should be able to know what the topic is that you are discussing and what your main points are and where you lay on that issue. Now, the key thing with the DBQ is make sure that you take a solid position. If they ask you to pick one side or the other, pick one side or the other. Do not sit in the gray area of that. Make sure that you pick one side or the other. The biggest way that they will ding you, again, is if you do not take a side when they ask you to take a side. Now, the other part with that is with the DBQ, make sure that you use at least 6 of the resources that they are giving you. And when I say use 6 of those resources, that doesn't mean you just quote it and that's the end of it. Again, when you think about this, when you use the DBQ documents, you want to partner those with analysis. So give analysis and use a document to help support that. And again, you do not have to quote the document all. You can refer to the document, but you do not have to quote from that document. And again, that's the biggest thing that really drags people's DBQs down, is that they spend time doing these long quotes from everything, and it detracts from your essay in a very, very big way. So again, do not do long quotes. If you want to throw in one quote from maybe a document, you can do that. Now, the other big part of this is in a DBQ, you are not just depending on the documents. You are also pulling in outside information as well. Make sure that you are pulling in other things or other resources or other things that you know that were going on in that time. The reader and the grader wants to know and see that you have the ability to connect this with things that they are not giving you. Again, if you base your essay just off the documents, you're not going to get a full score on it because, again, they want to see that you can pull in that outside information and that you can connect that with whatever the topic is during this time. Now, again, you can see if you read down in this that you do not have a long essay question. They're not doing that for the digital testing during this time. Instead, again, you have those required short answer questions that you have to do, extra ones that you have to do. So again, at the bottom, they kind of sum it up for you. You're going to have 3 short answer questions, 1 DBQ, and then because, again, you're doing the digital testing, you are going to have 2 more short answer questions that you have to do. So in total, you are going to have 5 short answer questions that you are going to be answering for this. Now, that might seem kind of overwhelming, but again, in my mind, a short answer question is a lot easier to answer than the longer 5-paragraph long essay questions. With that, I will say, make sure in the short answer questions that you answer the questions and that you are very succinct in your response. Again, for each part of it, A, B, and C, you generally only have to do about 2 to 3 sentences. And again, make sure that you are very, very specific in your answers. They are looking for those specifics. Another thing, as far as how you write them, make sure, again, do, question 1, do A. and then write your answer, and then write B, and then write your answer. Again, that makes it easier for the grader. And again, when you're taking the AP exam, the easier that you make things for the grader, the easier it will be for them to be able to find and score your response. Now, I'm speaking from experience in this. As an AP grader, of the short answer questions, it really does help that if you do that, and it's going to cause less confusion. And again, it's just going to help the grader as well. It is going to help you to make sure that you answer each one of those points, A, B, and C. So that's what the AP exam looks like for you this year. Again, you're kind of getting a reprieve and not having to answer that long essay question, but you do get the additional short answer questions that you're going to have to answer. So we are going to go ahead and jump right on in to the AP exam review and looking at the specific periods and kind of reviewing what was happening during these periods. And again, this isn't all encompassing because there is a lot of information. This is hitting, though, on the big things that are covered in the AP exam and the big topics and themes that you might see in the exam. So, period one overview, this covers the period from 1491 to 1607. Now, why did they have the year 1491? We all know Columbus showed up in 1492. Well, the reason that they did that was to emphasize the native societies that were already here, because you did already have very complex societies here of Native Americans, and they want to kind of include that as part of the story of what would be the future United States. 1607, of course, is the founding of Jamestown, which is the first permanent English colony in the New World. Now, period one is going to be roughly 4 to 6% of the exam. It is not a huge portion of the exam. You usually do not see a lot on this section on the AP exam. Usually when you do, it's somehow relating to like the native societies and the Europeans and what their relationship was like during this time. Again, you will not generally see any kind of essay or DBQ on this. I have seen short answer questions on this period before, but again, they usually involve the relationship between the natives and the Europeans and what the effect was of the Europeans coming here on the Native Americans. Again, you can see I include that there, the experiences of Native European countries in America. Also, too, another one I've seen before is comparing the different societies that came here. Again, remember the Spanish were already exploring the New World before the English ever showed up. So there might be something included with that as well. So like I said, much of the focus of this period is on native life prior to contact, prior to the Europeans coming here, and then the interactions between the different groups that were here, including what would eventually be the Africans coming here as well with the European exchange. So period one. Maize. Know that the native societies here grew a lot of corn in the Southwest U.S. and in Mexico, that their society was largely driven by corn. Now, you will see that that is different compared to the Great Plains or the Great Basin Native Americans that you had in those areas. Those tended to lack resources, which meant that they had a very nomadic lifestyle. You get to the Great Plains Indians, and again, they were traveling a lot. Usually they were following the buffalo, and that's why you're going to kind of see them be all over the area there. I think of the Comanche natives that were in Texas through Oklahoma, even going up into Colorado and those areas. Again, very nomadic because they tended to follow the buffalo along the way. They didn't really have a use for farming, and you're going to see that they generally didn't do any type of farming at all. They depended on the buffalo and then what they could forage for out in nature. And again, you will see that as far as the Native American groups go, that in the West, they are very different from the Eastern Native groups that you will see. In the East here in Virginia, you have the Algonquin Indians who were through Virginia and the Carolinas, even up into Maryland. And you're going to see that they generally stayed in one place. They grew things, including maize, corn, and other agricultural products, and that is how they sustained their society. So you do have different native groups throughout all of what is North America today. And that's going to be one of the issues later on when you're going to see in the United States, and when we start to focus on, or when they start to focus on kind of pushing the natives into the West onto reservations. That is one of the issues that they actually encounter, is that, some Native Americans groups didn't know how to farm. The Comanches and others in the Great Plains, they didn't care to farm. They wanted to follow the buffalo wherever they could. So again, if you're making connections to other periods, when you see Americans start to go out west, especially after the Civil War, and one of the big things that becomes a focus is killing off a lot of the buffalo population. Again, people wanted their hides, but at the same time, it became very obvious to settlers that if you killed off the buffalo, you took away a lot of sustenance from native groups out there, which meant they were more willing to do what you wanted them to do, such as move on to Indian reservations. Now, next up, the Columbian Exchange. Again, this should be a familiar term for you from World History 2, or if you took AP European History. And simply put, that is the exchange of goods, ideas, diseases, and people between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Again, just think of it, that triangular trade. That's kind of what the Columbian Exchange is. Generally, when they show the Columbian Exchange, they just show one arrow going back and forth that kind of represents both of the things, Europe and Africa coming over to the Americas, and vice versa. So what was the impact on the Americas? Of course, the Native American population would be decimated by disease. That would be the huge impact on the natives here. Also, you would have the introduction of European not just guns, but also tools and different goods that they brought over from Europe. Of course, guns would be a huge thing that would transform Native society, but also horses would lead to a massive transformation of Native society, especially in areas of the West. Again, you will see like the Comanches. They were a group, the Comanches, the Apaches, and others, especially in the West. They became really skilled with the horses, and that was their great benefit when taking on both the Spanish, English, French, others that moved into areas such as Texas. And that's why it took until the 1870s for the Comanche Nation to kind of finally be defeated and put onto an Indian reservation, is because of their great skill with horses. Also, you're going to see some racially mixed populations. Again, you are not going to see that generally in the East. You're going to see that more in the West, where the Spanish were. If you remember, we talked about the Spanish hierarchy and how the Spanish did intermarry with the natives much more frequently than you saw that in the East. I know we always have the story of like Pocahontas and John Rolfe, but again, that was more the exception than the rule in the East. In the West, especially in Mexico and California, Arizona, those areas, you will see that there is more combination of natives and the Spanish. And again, the Spanish and Native American population together, they were known as mestizos when those two intermarried or intermingled, however you want to call it. Now, what was the effect of the Columbian Exchange on Europe? You're going to see that potatoes and maize led to large population growth in Europe. Again, if you took AP European history, we would have talked about this in there. But you're going to see, because of all this new food coming into this areas, that is going to lead to large-scale population growth in Europe. Also, it's going to lead to an increase in capitalism in those areas as well, as you have a lot more buying and selling happening over in Europe. Now, what would be the impact of this on Africa? Of course, you would have the slave trade, and with the slave trade would come the Middle Passage. Again, this got started with the Spanish and the Portuguese in West Africa. They were the ones that started to realize that they could make a good amount of money by trading with the West African tribes there. The West African tribes had plenty of people there due to the setup of their society and how they were warring societies, and they tended to take captive anybody in another tribe that they captured. And then with history came them realizing, hey, we can actually sell any of the men of these tribes into slavery and make money off of them. So again, impact on Africa, not great, because you do have the slave trade as well as the horrors of the Middle Passage, which we talked a little bit about. But again, just a horrendous journey from Africa into the New World, one that saw a lot of death along the way. Now, I had just talked about that triangle of the Spanish society, and part of that is going to be the encomienda system. Now, what this was these were royal grants of land by the Spanish crown to settlers. And basically, what this allowed these settlers to do is, one, the settlers were promised to Christianize the natives, and as a result, because of that, basically the Europeans or the Spanish there got labor out of it. That's what it was. It was basically slavery. It was Indian slavery, using the natives for slavery in that. They were often treated very, very poor. The natives were there, or they would intermarry and that kind of thing. Eventually, the natives, of course, would be replaced with slave labor by the Spanish because of the natives' propensity for catching these European diseases and dying. You can see in the triangle there, here, I'm going to try to blow it up there, make it a little bit bigger for you to see. You can see in that, at the top, you would have the Spanish, then you would have the Creoles, which would be people born in New Spain, which is the New World, to Spanish parents. Then the mestizos that we talked about already, who were born of Spanish and Native American parents. Then you would have the Native Americans, and then at the bottom, you would have the slaves. As you can see, autonomy, that is a word that you may hear or see on the AP exam. Basically, what that meant is that Africans and Native societies, they tried to preserve their autonomy, their independence and self-rule. Again, they wouldn't be very successful in that, but they would attempt to do that after their contact with the Europeans. Again, it largely would not be successful, but you will see, even with the groups brought over here to the New World, that they did their best to try to keep some of the customs and principles, or customs and traditions that they had from home. That brings us to period 2. Like I said, period 1, very, very brief part of the exam. Now, period 2, that takes us from 1607 to 1754, and is roughly 6 to 8% of the exam. Again, 1607, that is the point of Jamestown, and then 1754 is, of course, the beginning of the 7 Years' War. Now, the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, is going to have a massive impact on the English colonies here, because we're going to see that's going to start the discontent with having, or large-scale discontent with having the British in charge. Now, essay topics with this, again, could have you compare and contrast the European powers, and we went into detail when we discussed this about what the English settlements look like, what the French settlements look like, and what the Spanish settlements look like. Also, you could see a comparing and contrast of the British colonies. Again, the one that I see most often, the comparing and contrast, which is why I gave this to you as a question when we went through this, is comparing and contrasting the Chesapeake with the New England colonies. So make sure that you know the difference between especially the Chesapeake and the New England. But also, again, remember when you break them down into sections, you have the southern colonies. Again, the Chesapeake colonies were part of the southern colonies. You have the middle colonies, and then at the top, you have the New England colonies. Again, this period continues to focus on European colonization, and England is going to be the significant focus with this, because you're going to see once the English get a foothold here and you start having more English come in to the New World, into what would later become the United States, that they are quickly going to kind of dominate the East Coast and dominate early American history. So, period 2 again. So looking at the different groups of colonies here. One, you have the New England colonies, who were established by the Puritans. Again, the Puritans were originally supposed to come to the Virginia colonies. They get thrown off track and they settle up in New England. Now, New England colonies are going to be different in that the people that came to the New England colonies, the Puritans and then the Pilgrims, they came here for religious freedom. That was their primary focus. And because of that, they had a very like-minded community. Now, within their community, they did a mix of agriculture and commerce. It quickly became apparent to them, though, that they were not going to be making large-scale money off of agriculture because of rocky soil in New England and because it is cold there and you don't have a very long growing season. So their major focus would be on commerce, which is trading with other areas. They would also do shipbuilding and fishing as well as ways to make money. Now, you're going to see within the New England colonies, because of this Puritan Puritan work ethic that they had. They were known as very, very hard workers. Another thing with the Puritans is that they set up covenant communities, basically a community focused on Christianity. And that's why you're going to see the church is going to be kind of the central part of each of their towns and societies. And the church would serve as the town hall and that kind of thing as well. Now, the middle colonies are kind of be a mix of the New England and the southern colonies, and that the middle colonies, you're going to see that some people come for religious freedom, such as in Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania Dutch and the Quakers that you have come there, while some of them are going to come into these areas to make money. So again, kind of think of the middle colonies as a mix between the New England and the southern colonies. Now, you're going to see that the middle colonies is very, very diverse. Because you have different groups coming there for different reasons, that's going to lead to a very diverse society, in that you're going to have Jews and Huguenots and Dutch and Quakers and lots of different groups coming in to the middle colonies. Again, they focused on cereal crops as well. And again, you're going to see their economy is very mixed as well between the New England and the southern colonies. The major focus, though, in the middle colonies, because of the port cities there, such as New York City and then Philadelphia, their major focus is going to be on trade. Next, that brings us to the Chesapeake colonies, which is Maryland and Virginia. These colonies are going to find their wealth and purpose in tobacco. Again, Maryland and Virginia, even though Maryland was originally founded as a haven for Catholics, the two major focuses, or the major focus of Virginia and Maryland colonies, is going to be on wealth and the making of money. Again, start of Virginia, their hope was to find gold. They never find gold, but they are introduced to tobacco and realize that that was just as good as gold and that they could make a lot of money on that. So the Chesapeake colonies, again, major focus on tobacco, and that's why you're going to see a lot of plantations in Eastern Virginia and in Maryland as well. With that growth of tobacco, they are going to realize that they need a labor force, and that labor force is going to be, at first, indentured servants, which are generally poor whites that come over from England. They either had debts, financial debts, or they had some sort of debt of society. Maybe they had gotten in legal trouble, and that was part of their punishment, was to be sent over and work as an indentured servant during that time. The supply, though, of indentured servants was not very good, and certainly there weren't the numbers that they needed. Other things that you're going to have happen that cause a shift away from indentured servants is Bacon's Rebellion. Again, I call that the most tasty of the rebellions, but Bacon's Rebellion, which was largely a rebellion of people that had been these former indentured servants, is again going to get people focusing more on African slavery, because African slavery, they were a slave for life and you didn't have to worry about them getting their freedom and then causing trouble. So that is when you're going to see with Bacon's Rebellion that shift to African slavery. And again, African slavery provided large numbers, which these tobacco plantations needed. Now, one thing that you are going to see with the Chesapeake colonies is, as far as the slaves, that you're going to see that the slaves in these areas, because tobacco, while it is very labor intensive, you weren't dealing with some of the climate issues that you would deal with in places in the lower South. So because of that, the slaves within the Chesapeake colonies are going to be able to kind of create their own societies. You're going to see a lot more families of slaves in the Chesapeake colonies than you will see farther south. This is also going to be an area why, a reason why later on down the road, you were going to see that in the Chesapeake colonies, they didn't really care or they didn't mind ending the slave trade into those areas once the United States is finally formed, because they had so many families of slaves there that would, reproduce, and they didn't need that supply of slaves coming in like areas to the farther south did. Now that brings us to the southern colonies in the West Indies. These areas grew staple crops such as sugar. You're going to see in areas such as South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, you're going to also have rice grown and indigo grown in these areas. And because of this, you're going to have a heavy use of slave labor. Again, you're going to see sugar primarily is in the West Indies. And both sugar and rice were very, very grueling to grow. And in the areas that these were grown, you saw a lot of disease. During the summers, they're hot and humid. When you grow rice, of course, you grow rice in standing water, which leads to lots of mosquitoes, which leads to mosquito-borne illnesses. So you're going to see that in the southern colonies and in the West Indies, that you do have a lot of slave trade because they needed the slaves to come in and replace the slaves that would die due to disease. Now, this would be bad for African society here in or in those areas because it made it very, very difficult to form a cohesive bond among the Africans there. Again, you had Africans coming from different tribes, and if you're constantly bringing in new people from different tribes, it just makes it hard to create a cohesive society, which is what you will see in those areas. Now, some of these areas, you will see Africans would make up the majority of the population, and you can say that for actually a lot of the South, that Africans start to grow and outnumber the whites living in these areas, which again would lead to issues, fears of slave rebellions and that sort of thing. Now, Pueblo Revolt, this is a very, very important part of the history of Western Native American groups here. What this was a Native American rebellion in the southwest portion of the United States, around the New Mexico, Arizona area there. And basically what you had in that area is you had the Native Americans that got sick of the Spanish influence there. Again, they went along with a lot of the Spanish ideals during this time, but when things such as praying to the Christian God did not work out for the Native Americans, and that happened repeatedly, they said, hey, we are done with this and we want to get rid of that. So the Pueblos would rebel. Pope was their leader. Pope, again, he actually has a statue in the U.S. Congress now because this Pueblo rebellion is very, very important because it helped to save Pueblo culture in many, many different ways. Now, another important thing that it did is actually drove the Spanish out of the Southwest for over 10 years. After that rebellion, you're going to see the Spanish are like, we are done. We're done with this area. And as a result of this revolt that would happen. Now, eventually the Spanish would come back in and regain control, but they began to advocate doing some different ways and interacting with the natives, trying to assimilate with natives, and just going about different ways of sharing Catholicism with the natives as a result of this. But Pueblo Revolt, again, marks one of those large-scale Native American rebellions that you didn't see happen very often. Again, Native Americans tended to choose, especially in the West, they would come in, kill, a handful of settlers, and then they would leave. That's generally what they did. So you generally don't see large-scale rebellions like this out of the Native Americans. Also, you're going to see British colonies, the Anglicanization of that, I always struggle to say that word, which basically is the process of becoming or taking on British characteristics. As more and more people started coming into the British colonies, you're going to see that a distinctly kind of American culture starts to form here. And that's why you're going to see 1607 and then by 1775 that people there's quite a big separation between the people, the Englishmen living here in the New World and then over in England. Now, you will see that there is still a lot of strong commercial ties. You will see writings between the two sides, texts, books, that kind of thing. But you're going to see, again, that there is going to be a separation that grows despite this Anglicanization of the British colonies, where you're going to get kind of a distinctly American society that forms. And again, that varies based on where you go in the colonies during this time as well. Now, also, you're going to have the impact of the Enlightenment. Of course, the Enlightenment focuses on reason and intelligence, and with that is going to become a lot of questioning of different forms of government. And we talk about this too with the Great Awakening that would happen here in the American colonies, how that got people questioning the church, which during this time, because the church and the government were very, very intertwined, when you started questioning one, that meant that the other would get questioned as well. Also, you had these writings that would come out during this time period, Montesquieu talking about the separation of powers, which would have a big influence on our government, but also you'd have John Locke talking about the consent of the governed and a whole host of other things that that he would discuss. Now, the Enlightenment principles, again, will take full hold here in the colonies and lead to huge changes, and obviously would have a massive, massive impact upon guys such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Adams, a whole host of our founding fathers. Now, with this whole system of colonization here, mercantilism is going to be a big part of that. And basically, mercantilism is the idea that colonies exist to benefit the mother country. So your goal is, as the mother country then, to have a positive balance of trade that favors the mother country. Also, another thing is that you want the colonies to be dependent upon you as a mother country. So, for example, here in the colonies, they would grow tobacco. That tobacco would then be shipped over to Europe to be refined and then made into something that could be smoked or chewed. Another great example is sugar. Sugar would be grown here, and instead of being turned into molasses in the colonies, it would be shipped back over to Europe, where it would then be turned into molasses. So again, the system of mercantilism represented a lot of great wealth for England, but also it made the colonies a somewhat, or actually very much dependent upon the mother country. Now, another thing that mercantilism is going to lead to is some restrictive trade policies. For example, we will talk about England putting in restrictions on the British colonies, saying, hey, you can't trade with France. So that is going to lead to a lot of smuggling happening in the English colonies, as traders and people here in the colonies still wanted to be able to trade with France, so they just did it anyway and did that through smuggling. Again, that's going to be important because you're going to see some of your most vocal advocates for independence, such as guys such as John Hancock, were very well-known smugglers of that time. So that brings us to the end of period 1 and 2. We are going to quickly look at some people that you need to know from these periods. And these are people that are frequently mentioned on the AP exam. So period 1, you have Juan de Sepulveda and Bartolomeu de las Casas. These guys, it's important, again, that they are on the same slide because you're going to see they have very different attitudes on how to treat the natives. Sepulveda, he advocated the harsh treatment of natives. Basically, he said that they are savages and that whatever treatment that they got was deserved, and he claimed that slavery for natives was justified under Christianity. Bartolomé de las Casas, he had the opposite view. He said, you know what, they might seem kind of backwards to us, the Native Americans, but he said they are still people and they should be treated the same as other people. Las Casas, he would be actually instrumental in helping end the encomienda system. Again, kind of comparing and contrasting these two is a really, really great short answer question. It's been seen on the AP exam before. Also, multiple choice questions. They love to throw these two in there and give you quotes and kind of focus on their view towards the Native Americans. Period 2, key people in the New England colonies, you would have John Winthrop. He would be the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colonies, and he would be the one, again, who very much promoted the idea that the New England colonies, and specifically these new English colonies, were to be a city upon a hill. Again, that is a reference to the Bible and the New Testament, Jesus talking about people being a city upon a hill and how they should be an area that is looked at upon the world and kind of held to a higher standard. Also in the New England colonies, you're going to have Roger Williams. He would be kicked out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and establish Rhode Island, which was a haven of religious toleration. Again, we didn't talk about the Salem witch trials, but you're going to see within the New England colonies, they were very intolerant of behaviors that went against their primary beliefs. You could be a Christian, but still do things that were against what they wanted you to do, and they were very, very intolerant of that. That's going to lead to Roger Williams being kicked out and focusing on Rhode Island. Anne Hutchinson, again, she's going to be a notable female leader within the Massachusetts Bay Colony who had lots of disagreements with the leadership of that. She challenged kind of the gender norms by leading her own Bible study and kind of speaking her own truths from what she had read for the Bible. So she would be kicked out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and actually go over to Rhode Island, where Roger Williams were. The middle colonies, of course, William Penn, Pennsylvania, would be a very, very big impact in that. Again, he founded Pennsylvania, and you would have the Quakers in Pennsylvania. Again, very religiously and ethnically diverse. You're also going to see the Quakers. They have kind of a different way of trying to deal with the Native Americans. They try to be as peaceful as they can always. Again, that's going to get them into trouble in several different ways. But again, William Penn founding Pennsylvania there. The Enlightenment, we just talked about John Locke. Again, his views of natural rights, life, liberty, and property, which Thomas Jefferson would change to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But again, he is one of those major inspirations behind the Declaration of Independence, as well as Thomas Paine, who actually spells out the reasons for the American colonies to declare independence. I mentioned the First Great Awakening, and again, whenever we talk about the First Great Awakening, the big impact of that is that it is going to get people questioning the government of that time as well as the church. And that's why when we talk about the First Great Awakening, you immediately need to think about the American Revolution, because a lot of people would say without the Great Awakening, the American Revolution might not have happened. Two of your big leaders during the Great Awakening are going to be Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. Whitefield was a great orator. When we talked about him, we actually talked about the impact that he had on even Ben Franklin, who went and was so moved by what he wrote that Ben Franklin actually gave money. Next up, too, you're going to have Jonathan Edwards, who kind of started the First Great Awakening in his famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And again, these guys did things very, very different. They gave very passionate speeches. And that is how they kind of related to the people during that time. So that is the end of the key people to know. I know I said I was going to keep this video short, and it is quickly becoming to my attention that we are over 40 minutes now. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the chat box. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, just write them down and email them to me. I am going to scroll down here. And again, all of these slides are available to you. And actually, if you look at the bottom of them, if you see down there, I have the answer, what the answer is for each one of those review questions. So I think instead of actually going through these questions, I'm going to leave them for you. Again, I created that document that has links to all of my slides. So if you specifically want to look at questions, I recommend going to these slides and going and checking out the end of that and looking at the review questions and looking at the answers. And again, all of these questions are ones that were on our quizzes that we did. If you were first semester student, you would have seen those then. If you're a second semester student, you're actually still going through these. So make sure you check out these quiz questions. Again, they're at the end of each one of them. Again, I know it can be kind of overwhelming to go through all of them. So I recommend pick out those areas that you're not very, very strong in. I know for me personally, I don't feel the strongest when I'm talking about the progressive movement. That's just not the area that I feel the strongest in discussing. So I might go actually review that. So I'm going to stop this video now, but I am still going to be on here to help answer questions that you might have. And I'll still be available to answer those questions for you. So feel free to reach out with questions. Again, if you don't have questions, feel free. You can go ahead and jump on off of here. But again, next class, we will jump into covering periods 3 and 4, which has a lot of information. But again, like I said, if you know all of this information, it is going to help you in a big way. Lastly, before I sign off here, I did provide another document of resources for you. There are a lot of good resources out here for the AP exam. So feel free to look at those resources, especially the Gilder Lehrman Institute. They have a lot of good stuff on there. And you can find all kinds of practice tests online as well if you would like to do that kind of thing. So again, if you have questions, email them to me or message me here. I will be available to answer your questions. Otherwise, have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you back tomorrow for the second part of our APUS review session.